So my name is Josh Peacock. I'm with Sirius Healthcare. We're a national integrator of technology, and part of our team is focused specifically on the healthcare industry. And the team members that are part of my team have all spent a significant amount of time in the shoes of providers. Typically, is where most of us have come from. And then we'll walk you through today some of what we witnessed and experienced as part of supporting some of our clients that were on the coast, specifically during the initial surges that happened with COVID here earlier this year, and what that meant, to us and how that changed. One of the things that we noticed right away was both in organizations that were in the thick of it and also that were preparing for their own surges in their local regions was a desire to expand testing and do that in a way that would keep people out of facilities as much as possible and turn them very fast on being able to come in and get the test and then get out of the location again. So what we actually had noticed was a significant increase in televisits in order to schedule that initial test. And then beyond that, they would then go to a kind of a drive-through type of situation to have the test administered. Now, what we'd seen is most of the time that had primarily been the use of facilities that were owned by a healthcare organization already, maybe an ambulance bay, maybe just in the parking lot of a facility or a clinic. But what we were seeing as well is a desire to provide connectivity and the ability to do this from more remote situations, either maybe a parking lot within a employer that needed to do testing across a large group within their employee base, or in potentially grocery stores or some other locations. So that was some of the key things that we had seen early on. We still see some organizations looking to deploy those as well. I'm in South Dakota, and we had one of the hotspots for a little while. It was one of the meatpacking plants, and one of the health systems here locally did exactly that. They went and set up in the parking lot and then connected back to their main systems and used that connectivity to rapidly test all the employees of that meatpacking plant. Some things that we were seeing as considerations specifically to how you wanted to address this is addressing power and then also a tent and a structure to potentially have the equipment and printers and such located. We're seeing small tents to people also bringing in almost what would be like a job site office type of space, and then secure storage for that equipment, whether or not that was a spot that you were continuously kind of reopening, or if you were putting that into a van or a truck to move that around from different spots if you were doing testing at different places. And then some of the technology that we were seeing there was a WOW workstation, laptop, maybe a different set of number of quantities of that based on the number of people that you were trying to staff at that location, and then different printers, and then wired and wireless connectivity for that little spot that you were doing the testing at. One of the other items, though, in those remote ones that we noticed that was really important to organizations was LTE connectivity as they were doing that remote testing. And with that, we actually did find that there was a pretty significant difference in the performance based on using these routers that had LTE capability if you were just using a simple standard like what we would get as a normal resident or consumer from a Verizon or an AT&T versus AT&T's FirstNet. So they have bands that are dedicated directly to first responders. And so a lot of the healthcare organizations that we were able to test with, we were buying routers that could do both of those bands, and the FirstNet was significantly better from a bandwidth and latency perspective, so there was just a lot less congestion on those networks. Obviously pretty consistent, I guess, with having a lot of people at home streaming and doing their work over internet connectivity that maybe hadn't been stressed that much in the past. One of the things I kind of think about too is there was a lot of stuff that was going on in those early days, and I don't know if anybody can put in the chat window too. I'd be curious what people are thinking around if we'll need this level of capacity with the surges that we see coming up. There was a lot of run up where environments were being built out, hospitals inside of, this was the Javits Center, but in the McCormick Center and other places across the country, they were building up and preparing for significant surges. I don't know if I'm not really seeing that in some of the other spaces right now, in Texas or in Florida, anybody that's having their main surges occurring right now. But this was its own technology challenge too, right? Connectivity was okay, but then getting secure connectivity back to the healthcare organization was different. Anybody that's on right now, if in the chat window, if you have any thoughts on that, if we think that we would see a significant need for this type of capacity. One of the other things that, from our perspective, that we were really seeing was technology man and what that meant to the healthcare industry. We did see it impacted significantly across the industries that Sirius serves, but in healthcare, we did notice some items as well. Some of those that were significantly concerning at the time was, organizations had to make decisions based on what was really available to them from a technology perspective. So in some cases, it was less optimal solutions. So thinking ahead of what we might need and what maybe you could procure prior to really getting into the few weeks before a potential surge. And I'm sure a lot of organizations have gone through that process at this point. I see here too, you guys are saying not in Michigan, we don't think that we would need that capacity. It's great to hear. Some of the other stuff that we were seeing too was partner organizations really need to have a wide network for sourcing technologies, especially if you're looking for something in quantity. We were seeing things as organizations, and some of this was maybe more associated with sending some of our workers home to do their work from home. Thousands of devices potentially were needing to be sourced. And even from a Sirius perspective, we were having to look across distribution channels in order to make sure that we could source enough equipment for the clients that were needing some of that gear. So I think it's important for both a healthcare organization and then the partners that you choose to work with, that they have those broad networks to be able to pull from and get the equipment that's needed. One of the items that I think will help us in these future surges as we're moving along, just like with toilet paper being in super high demand in the beginning, for whatever reason, that's dwindled, allowing supply to catch up, much like what we're seeing with technology at this point. Servers, laptops, PCs, cameras, those sorts of things are all, supply chain is being able to catch up with that at this point. So I think that's a positive for us as we look forward here. And I think that's also mostly because, I'm hoping that surges here won't coincide with massive shifts of work from home. And then also another item, Sirius, particularly, we have a large end user compute practice. And as part of that team, they spent the vast majority of March, April, and May deploying organizations in the cloud on desktops or extending capabilities. So that was a concern for us because we had a lot of clients that needed help, but even our availability was a little bit delayed. So now that supply has been catching up, and we've been able to help organizations again now more effectively. I see in Texas too. Thank you for the feedback too. That's great to hear. I think that is also, we've had time in these other parts across the country to prepare and handle things maybe differently than the way it was thrown at us at New York and California and some parts earlier in the pandemic. So this is actually what I would kind of consider a little bit of the bright spot for healthcare. We had some really great ingenuity and unimpeded just being able to do things without a lot of concern for some of the items that normally hold us back and are the shackles of what we are bound against in normal day-to-day in some cases. And when we look at that, I see it in a few different things as we go. We saw, from a tele perspective, rapid adoption in a very, very short time across numerous platforms to be able to support both direct patient to provider, and then even some of the stuff that we were seeing internally from organizations where they were trying to limit the amount of PPE that was burned by going in and out of rooms over and over. And we'll talk about that one a little bit more too, because there was really some interesting things that were used to solve it in the early days there. And I think it was with what the government did to open up reimbursements, And then the other thing that fueled it, I think, was significantly, patients didn't want to come in, caregivers didn't necessarily, providers didn't want to go in as well and expose themselves. And so we had this kind of coming together of the need for the technology and the desire by people to actually leverage it. And so that really fueled the usage of it. We had a lot of organizations that had massive increases in the number of visits that they had virtually. And then many organizations with the on-prem solutions did see some struggles. We helped a lot that were trying to expand rapidly their ability to increase the number of televisits they could have, versus in some cases people did full sale replacements of their back-end tele solution just so that they could increase with those kind of on the fly via cloud capability. And we did see some of the commercial options that a lot of people use for direct provider to patient being overwhelmed and long wait times. I know personally I had a couple of experiences too where I have 3 small kids, and one of those had an issue that we wanted to just reach out and check in on, and it took us almost an hour and a half to get to someone that we could talk to. So there was some oversubscription there that was definitely brought about, but again, it was much better than us going and waiting in a waiting room for a long period of time. So I do think that will change people's minds as we go forward beyond this in how they plan for on-premise versus cloud versus what the scalability options are that they have around the ability to go significantly higher in their number of visits. So one of the things that I thought was really interesting, and there were some articles about this one, but one of the organizations in New York used Google Nest, and there's some really interesting properties to that. I mean, there's concerns, obviously, with it going to the cloud, Google having control of all that data, those sorts of things. I mean, there's lots of things that people could throw up, but really the ingenuity around it, you can have sound alerts, you can set up a motion detection, but most importantly, what it was really doing for those organizations was allowing them to put video and audio into a room, put a number of those screens up in front of nurses and caregivers in a centralized location to monitor multiple patients without having to go in and out constantly. And so there's a lot of organizations that talked about just how much that saved them in time and in their ability to reduce the amount of PPE burned every day by people. So that was a very significant benefit for many. And then one of the other ones, so that was one option, was Google Nest. And then another organization, they used their Pello speakers in conjunction with just plain security cameras as part of what they already had as a platform in place for that. And then made that available to those central nursing stations again. So those were all great options. They saved money, took caregivers out of harm's way as much as possible. Obviously, we can't do that completely. But those were great uses of technology. And these are the things where I say that we were able to unimpeded use our creativity, our ingenuity to solve problems. And it was one of those situations where I was, proud of healthcare IT from that perspective, because we get a bad rap in a lot of cases. A lot of industries say that we can't innovate and do things as well as they can. But if we take away some of those restrictions, we really do have a lot of really smart people in this industry that can make it happen. This also too is one of the items that I think Sirius sees some of the work that we're doing as what do we think a room of the future could look like, room next, for an inpatient setting. And this is one of those items where the use of audio and video and some of those items could help a more standard room become capable of supporting people that are in a greater need. And so that is one of those items of how we can leverage technology for day-to-day normal kind of care, but then also use it in situations to augment what we wouldn't have had normally. So I also wanted to touch a little bit too. Sirius did some work with some organizations in the spin up towards what was happening in New York and the West Coast as well. We've seen a lot of organizations send people home to work from home, and how they secure that access has been interesting. Cloud has been part of that answer in some cases, providing a remote desktop solution that they're able to connect into, which then gives them access into the organization's tools and applications. Then also, we did see, and the CDC's site was powered by this. A lot of other organizations were powered too. There was chatbots that were allowing organizations to significantly offload the amount of calls that were coming into their call centers and let people get the information that they needed to take the next step, whether or not that was to actually talk to someone or to feel comfortable that they were okay to continue, taking care of themselves at home. But really, those chatbots were a pretty significant savings for organizations to limit their call center volumes. Emergency capacity. This was an interesting one. There was a lot of concern early that there was going to be a need for more compute technology to support end users connecting in, because we were thinking that there was going to be a lot of additional caregivers that were going to be required. And then, so a lot of, if you looked at pretty much any of the major manufacturers were coming out with ways that they could help organizations provide for extra capacity needs. When we actually got to it, makes a lot of sense, I guess, in hindsight, but because of the fact that we had so many electives and everything else canceled and not going on, we actually had plenty of capacity at all those organizations. I'm not saying that's going to be the complete answer in the future, but it is what we did note during the surges earlier in April and March. We really tried to spend a lot of time and make ourselves as available as possible to any clients to help answer, think about, throw ideas out to solve any of the problems that they were trying to deal with. So that was really key, was just being there to listen and support them in any way that we could. And then we took, secondarily, we also were investing in podcasts that were helping organizations spread the word about how they were dealing with it from both the clinical aspect, technology aspect. And so that was one of our other ways to make sure that we could provide some information and education out to the industry. And then we also tried to strive to document and publish anything that we created and share that with the masses. We knew that we couldn't reach to everybody, and we wanted to support as much as we could. And so we wrote white papers and case studies and documentation that we were able to share out with organizations. And that was published on our websites and given out freely as much as possible to ensure we could impart our knowledge that we were gaining, and hoping others would do the same to support the better of everyone. And so I was just going to show those here. So you can access that through the HealthIMPACT Sirius virtual booth, which Eli and Ed from the Sirius team will be manning here later too, if you'd like to chat with someone. And then there's a couple other links that we can make sure that we'll get out to you guys too, that we'll continuously be posting as we bring new things and document new things as well, from solutions or ideas or ways that other organizations have solved things. So with that, I think we can open it up to if there's any question and answer or some discussion too, if there is. Looks like there's some chats that have been going on. All right, well, I think looks like everybody's answers are in the chat. Looks like everybody's good. I appreciate you guys' time today, and I hope that you have a great day.